I was able to create a full modal system using that with very minimal code. Viktor has been able to find some really great accessibility stuff that's in there, which he's going to talk about today. So it's definitely something worth looking into if you're actually utilizing Angular on a regular basis on your project. So let's go into it. Viktor is going to show you a really cool application where he implemented accessibility stuff, and we'll get into it, and please enjoy.
All right, Viktor.
All right, thank you. So a little introduction about myself. I think Pete did a great one, but I'm Viktor. I work here at Packback. I've been here, I think now, 2 years and a month in a front-end developer and web accessibility specialist role. So it's kind of like a two-trick pony, hopefully more than that, but twofold role, which is I'm a front-end developer and I do a lot of like feature work and pushing the product forward, but I'm also like the main person pushing for accessibility at Packback. So that means I talk with auditors to look at checklists of WCAG results that we get back. If you don't know what WCAG is yet, don't worry, we'll cover that too. But also I work to make sure that everyone on the team is trained on accessibility, everyone has a good eye for it, just giving like internal presentations, that kind of thing. And also making sure that our designers are really aware of it. Because as most folks will tell you, accessibility isn't really like a one-point thing. If you just try and do accessibility at the design level or the developer level, it's not going to work out really well. You need a full stack. So that's part of the stuff I do. So like Pete mentioned, I'm going to be talking about my experiences with the Angular CDK and accessibility, but also more specifically how we built a really accessible avatar builder. So most of the tricks here aren't actually related to the CDK. There's one really important one. But most of it is HTML and CSS. It's stuff that you can use even outside of Angular. So that said, the only last remark is we are recording this talk. I will be working with Pete to subtitle it and make sure it's nicely captioned and put it up on YouTube probably within the week. So that's it. Any other questions before we get started? Great. So let's roll right into it. So high-level agenda, what I'll be discussing, the what and why of accessibility, the quick TLDR. If you don't know what accessibility is, or maybe have a fuzzy understanding, we'll cover that. The story of our avatar builder. Why were we building an avatar builder? How did it come to be? And what were the requirements that we had? And then our solution. What did we come up with when we were solving for creating this avatar builder that we talked about? And then lastly, takeaways for you. I don't want just to be like, this is an avatar builder. It's accessible. It's cool. I want to give you a set of things that you can do that independent of the project that you're working on, you're going to be making it more accessible. So a few caveats with all of this. I've worked in accessibility for a little while, but I am not an expert. Specifically, disabilities are many and varied, and the best way that you can make a product that's really accessible is to hire, test, and design with folks who have disabilities. Inclusive design is really the name of the game, and if you are just taking a set of able people and having them design for accessibility and test for that, they're going to do a pretty good job. Really bringing in people with a wide set of disabilities is going to get you a much better result, and you're going to be doing a much more inclusive approach. And second, I'm proud and confident of the knowledge I have in regards to accessibility, but there are a lot of other smart people in this space that you should follow and talk to and read about who have way more knowledge about this. So Jen Simmons, she works for Mozilla, she's really great about this. Sarah Soudain, who talks about this. Lots of amazing front folks who work on accessibility, who do all this kind of stuff, auditors, there's all sorts of people. So I'm not by any means going to give you this is the law of accessibility, because that would be bogus. So let's get started. What is accessibility? I'm just going to read this quote straight from NPM here. Accessibility is the practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible. You can think of accessibility as treating everyone the same and giving them the same opportunities no matter their ability or circumstances. I think this is a really great piece of language and a really great quote, which is why I just cite it verbatim. It's like a great, quick explanation. Now, this is important. The way we think about disability sometimes can be pretty old-fashioned, so I want to highlight this one. Disability is not considered anymore as a personal health condition. It's a pretty limited way of thinking about it. Disability is rather a set of mismatched human interactions. So the best way to think about it is a person is only really aware of their disability if they are unable to do something, right? If you are using a wheelchair, as one of my friends does, and there are stairs and there's no accessible entrance, then suddenly that's a problem for you, and suddenly you're made aware that that space isn't welcoming to you. But if the space is fully accessible and there's no barrier to you entering, then it's a smooth experience. So you want to make sure that you avoid these mismatched human interactions. But you also want to make sure that you're not thinking about disability as there are disabled people and they have a personal health condition. That's not a great frame of reference. That's That's not a great way to think about it. We want to think about it, we want to make sure that there's a smooth experience. Now, why does this matter? There's a lot of reasons, and my personal preference is the moral reason of you should make your product work for everyone, and that's the right thing to do. But some people like numbers, so we're going to run some numbers by you. So 15% of the world's population, that's about 1 billion people, have some form of a disability. This is according, I think, to a WHO study, sources linked in there. And despite this, despite 15% of the world population having some sort of disability, 42% of federal US government sites in this one study were found to be inaccessible. 42% of US government websites. If there's anyone who should be making accessible websites, it's the US government. They legally mandated it for themselves, but they're not compliant. So that's a big problem. And the web is probably much worse than this. So we want to make sure we're doing better. Now, I mentioned that disability is a mismatch of interactions. So I want to talk about this using this framework that Microsoft has called the persona spectrum. So I'm just going to lay these out and give some examples. But the idea of the persona spectrum is that disability comes across a spectrum of the senses impacted, but also the time involved with the disability. What you think of most commonly as a disability may be these permanent disabilities that people often think of there in their heads. The first thing you might think of is someone who is deaf or blind or has a prosthetic arm or something like that. That's a permanent disability. But disability comes in a spectrum, and sometimes your disability is situational. For example, do you notice how bars always have closed captions on? It's not because everyone in the bar is deaf, it's because it's loud, and you have a situational disability. You have the inability to hear in the situation of the bar, and closed captions, which are originally built and designed for people who are deaf, help you even if you're just a bartender at a busy bar. And maybe your disability isn't situational, but it's temporary. For instance, if you have an ear infection, right? You don't have the ability to hear, maybe you can't hear as clearly, but it's temporary. You know it's going to go away, but you still need these accessibility measures to work. And I highly recommend this framework. This is a good way of thinking about it, but it also highlights an important thing called the curb cut effect. Raise your hands if you've heard of the curb cut effect. All right, we've got a hand. Okay, so the curb cut effect. Has anyone noticed that in Chicago, the curbs slope down to meet the road? So the curb cut effect is the idea that curb cuts, which were created for people with disabilities who are in a wheelchair so that they can use the sidewalk, benefits a wide group of people outside of the designated audience. Lots of people, when they hear about curb cuts, they're like, oh, the thing for me and my stroller, perfect! No, it wasn't made for you and your stroller, but it benefits you, right? Even though it was designed for people in a wheelchair, it benefits a wide variety of people. Seniors using a grocery cart, me when I'm doing laundry and I have to use the laundromat, any group of people can benefit from this. And the curb cut effect is the idea that accessibility doesn't just benefit people who we think of as having disabilities, it really enhances the experience for everyone. So that's kind of like our high-level overview of accessibility. We're going to jump into avatars, but does anyone have any questions on accessibility? I want to keep this flowing, keep the conversation going. So if you have any questions, go for it now. No? Going once, going twice? Great. So let's talk about Packback avatars. So Packback in the beginning, it's a discussion platform. But for a long time, we had discussion posts that just had a generic avatar. You can think about this as it was just like a generic yellow books icon. Everyone looked the same, and it wasn't really fun. We don't even know why we were showing the avatar, because everyone had the same one. And we wanted to make sure that all of our users could express themselves. We wanted our platform to be more social media-esque in a way, and we wanted to make sure that students felt like they had a personal touch. So we also wanted to make sure that communities were more lively, they looked more engaging. But we wanted to ensure that all of our students could do this. So we needed a highly accessible solution. But before we could get there, we built a prototype. So at Packback, we have these things called hackathons. Raise your hand if you've heard of a hackathon, been in a hackathon. Great. So we had a hackathon at Packback, and me and our chief product officer, Jessica, built avatars.packback.co. Now this is live, so you can actually go check it out. And I'm going to pull it up here. But we wanted to prove out that an avatar builder was something that we could do. So we built this pretty basic site. No, not the keyboard. There we go. So we built a pretty basic site, but what it let you do is it let you pick and create a wide variety of avatars. Here I'm just randomizing here to show you a different set of avatars, but these were all styled in the vein of what Jessica's signature style was. She used to create avatars for each team member individually. So she created the set of features, and we built a basic avatar builder. Now, there were a few accessibility things built in here. For instance, it is tab navigable, so you can keyboard navigate it, but it's a bit slow, a bit clunky, and there are a few issues with it. So we will dig into those a little bit more as we jump in later. But needless to say, it wasn't perfect. It was just a prototype, we built it in a week, but it proved out the concept. We could build an avatar system, and we could also make it accessible. Now, like I mentioned, in the prototype, there was keyboard accessibility. All the buttons could be accessed via tabs, but it was really tedious. As you saw in the example there, when you're looking at that top navigation, you have to tab through all of it to get into the avatar pieces. To then pick colors, you have to tab through up to 20 different pieces of features. So say if you picked hair, you have to tab to hair, then you have to pick through all the other things you didn't pick, go through all the hair, and then you finally get to colors. So it's just very tedious. Now we had text alternatives. All piece buttons had a designated text alternative based on what that piece was called. So for instance, it might be swoopy hair or an afro, or whatever the case may be for that piece, it would have an alternative and screen reader would identify that. But the issue was, although each piece had a text alternative, there was no way that a screen reader user could see their avatar as a whole. They would get kind of a glimpse, they would pick these individual pieces, but it's hard to keep in your head which ears you picked 5 minutes ago. So we wanted a better solution for that. And like I just showed off, that's the prototype. So in the final version, there were a lot more things that we needed to do. We wanted to enhance the keyboard navigability to really get to the next level. We wanted to fix some color contrast issues that showed up in the previous version. If you notice, those labels that showed up over buttons just weren't that great. And we inserted some hidden navigation headings. Now we'll get to those in a little bit, but essentially what we did is we made it possible for screen reader users to see headings that weren't there for sighted users, that a sighted user might not need. And then finally, one of the fun parts with Angular CDK was we built a custom screen reader avatar preview. So, and we'll showcase this in a little bit, what would happen is a screen reader user could go and press a button and hear the preview avatar that they have built for themselves. So for example, with me, it might be you had the pale face with the pointy ears and the swoopy brown hair, and it would list off on and on. So it would give a good explanation of what were the sum of the pieces that you had picked. So you didn't have to hold that all in memory. So let's try these techniques in the finished avatar builder, and I'm going to walk through how we pulled some of these off. So I'm going to do a few things here. First things first, I'm going to enable a screen reader here. I'll also sign in. Perfect. And then let's enable Chromebox here. So this is going to get a little loud for a second.
Alert. Update profile avatar. Tab.
Okay.
Login successful. Close this alert. Login successful. Close this alert. Change face.
There we go.
Button
Okay.
pressed.
So as you can see, I've got a screen
Update
reader.
profile avatar. Google Chrome. Window. Exit main.
We're just going to let her say that.
Press F11 to exit full screen.
Thank you. Okay, so as you can see, I'm in the full screen version of the avatar editor, and we're going to jump through some of those accessibility features. Now, who here has used a screen reader before? Raise your hand. Great, that's fantastic. So testing with a screen reader is really one of the most vital things that we did in this process, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just hypothetically doing these things, but that we could actually use a screen reader and achieve the things we want to accomplish. So first things first, we talked about tab navigability. Let me show you some of the issues that happened before. So if I hit change hair,
Change hair. Button up.
I activate it. Oop. The computer freezes. That's not supposed to happen.
Change
Oh, there we go.
ears. Change fit. Just the size.
So now it's
Button
happening,
pressed.
and I'm going to turn this down a little bit here. There we go.
Just the top. Button up. Mohawk. Buzz cut. Curved width.
as you can see, I have to tap through all those, right?
On top. Button not pressed.
Thank you. It's going to be annoying. I'm sorry. I can't stop it as I might want to. But so the solution that we came up to is if we, let me turn off the screen reader for a second so I can show you hidden things.
Inspect control plus shift plus I. Menu item. 10 of 10.
1 second here.
Alert. Press F11 to exit full screen. Window update profile avatar tab.
Okay, we're going to turn off the screen reader for now so I can actually show you what we're looking at, and then we'll turn it back on once we're ready. Oh, thank you for that. Okay, so if we search in here for an H2 tag, there we go. There's the edit profile. So there's this thing, H2.visibly hidden. Now what could that be? So if I remove this class, you will see select category. So what happens is navigation for a sighted user here is fairly obvious, right? There's these really clear delineations. It would be kind of overkill to put a bunch of text on the page that would demarcate them, right? But the issue is there are so many interactive elements that a screen reader user is going to need landmarks so they can quickly jump to the section that they care about. So what we did is we implemented some CSS that keeps a piece of text, in this case a heading, in the screen reader's hierarchy, but hides it from a sighted user. There's a lot of great articles on this, and I'll be sharing out a code pen at the end of how we do this, but essentially you just use some CSS trickery. The main thing is don't do display none, because the screen reader will remove stuff. But instead, when we look at the CSS here, we put it back on, what's happening is we do like a clip path. We set the height to 1, we use negative margins, we do like white space, no wrapping, hide it, padding, all that stuff to make it essentially like this 0 pixel by 0 pixel element, but it's still there. So the screen reader can still pick up on it and still access it. Now to prove that, because the proof is in the pudding, what we're going to do is I'm going to turn on the Chromebox here.
Update profile avatar. Tab.
And then we're going
Generic
to
container.
let it finish.
Generic container.
Select avatar preview. Footer. Wrap to top.
Okay,
Edit
so
profile avatar.
I just jumped to our
Heading 1.
level 1 heading, and then
Select category.
I
Wrap
just,
2.
the key command I just pressed was to jump to the next level heading, level 2 heading. And you'll hear that says select category. And now if we jump to the next one,
Button. Customize and control Google Chrome.
okay, that's not correct. Come on.
Select color.
There we go.
Heading 2.
So the next heading 2 is the select color. And the instant we've done that,
Short widow's peak.
Come on.
Button. Select
we can jump
Button
into the
not
color
pressed.
selection. So what happens is that these invisible landmarks make it really easy for a screen reader user to jump across the page very quickly without impacting what was already a fairly obvious UI for a sight user. So if we jump to the next one,
Avatar preview.
we have the
Heading
avatar
2.
preview. Thank you. So the avatar preview, this makes it easy so that once you've picked all your things, you can just jump to the next level heading, 2 heading. There you go, you're in the preview. So now, I've built my avatar, I've spent some time customizing it, but I want to hear what it looks like. So if we tap from here,
Read my current avatar settings.
this invisible button shows up out of nowhere. And what happens if we press it?
In the avatar builder, you have selected the light beige heart-shaped face, the dark brown short and flat hair, the light beige pointy ears, the wide eyes, the dark brown bushy brows eyebrows, the deep nostrils nose, the smirk mouth, the charcoal earbuds accessories, and the red circle background.
Voila. So what we did there is we made it so that this was a little bit of code with the Angular CDK, but the Angular CDK has this lovely thing called the announcer. We'll turn this off now, thank you. So if we look at the Angular CDK announcer, live announcer, there we go. So if we jump to the live announcer, what the live announcer lets us do is we can just we pull it in with the constructor in Angular, and we can just do live announcer.announce and put in any text that we want. So what we did here is we had this JSON object that is the avatar configuration, and we have all the previews. And fortunately, this code I won't be showing you because that would be very proprietary. But I have a code pen that does include the CDK, but will include all the CSS stuff. But you can announce any string you want. So with the avatar builder, what we did is we essentially just created a sentence, a human readable sentence that was what is the thing that the current user has selected. So we just say, okay, this piece plus this piece plus this piece and so on and so forth, and insert commas and make it nice and readable, and then we just play it back to the screen reader. So we just say, okay, when the user presses that button, live announcer.announce the generated sentence of the avatar preview. So that means that as they update it, they can constantly jump back to that section and read it out again. So let's give it a try and make sure that updates. So we enable this again. I'm actually I'm gonna disable it until we're ready. So if, for example, I pick a mohawk and I change to some pearl earrings and toss on some glasses, you'll notice I didn't even have glasses set before. So one thing that we did here, again, it's just string manipulation, but it's all in the service of the user, is don't mention things that they haven't picked. If they don't have glasses, we don't have to tell them they don't have glasses. They know that. So we only do the things that they've selected, because some of these categories are optional, like everyone needs a face. Sorry, legal requirements. but not everyone needs beard, facial hair, accessories, eyebrows, all those fun things. So we've done that. We've changed me to a mohawk, some pearl ears. Anything else we should change? Suggestions from the audience?
Face shape.
Face shape, okay. Let's start with that. We're going to give me a nice square jaw. Looks chiseled. Anything else?
Add a beard.
Add a beard, perfect. Because we didn't have a beard before, so we're going to give myself a nice goatee and stash.
That's good. Go to good.
All right. Now we're going to turn on Chromevox. Jump over here.
Update profile avatar. Tab.
Select avatar.
And you'll notice
Read my
in
current avatar
4
settings.
key presses, I was able to jump to the Read My Current Avatar Settings button. So that's the main goal. Is we want to make sure that the user doesn't have to just tab through a shit ton of stuff, right? Accessibility isn't just about making sure that your site has things that you can interact with the keyboard. It's really making sure that you're treating your screen reader users as first-class citizens. So in this case, that means giving them the shortcuts they need so they can jump to the content you want quickly. So now, if we read this out,
In the avatar builder, you have selected the light beige square jaw face,
oh, look at
the
that.
dark brown mohawk hair, the
Handsome.
light beige pointy ears,
True.
the wide eyes,
Also
the
true.
dark brown bushy brows eyebrows, the deep nostrils nose, the smirk mouth, the charcoal pearl earrings accessories, the black circle glasses,
Right
the
there.
black goatee and stash facial features, and the red circle background.
Voila. So there we go. So this makes it so that even if you are heavily visually impaired or even blind, you're going to have a good idea of the avatar that you're building. And when you save it, you're going to have a good understanding of what's going on. So that is our avatar builder. I'm trying to think, are there any tricks that I missed that we pulled off? So the 2 things to point out is there's the visibly hidden, right, that we talked about, and the code pen will have an example of that. But the other thing is this button, which has a class that we call focus trigger. So what happens is, and we've tried a bunch of things here, is if you take a button and you make it display none, and on focus you show it, that's actually bad. And the reason it's bad is the screen reader won't know it's there until they focus on it, which just does not work. Like, it's a really bad experience. So what you actually want is you want it to be always visible to a screen reader, but in this case, just for our own sakes, we want to make it show up on focus. So we want to make it so that it's visibly hidden only if it is not in focus. So when it's focused, we remove the visibly hidden style, it shows up on the screen, but the whole time it was there for a screen reader. So if a screen reader user is jumping around, then independent of where their focus is, the screen reader will know it's there, and we'll be able to access that up. So, I think we mentioned all of these techniques. Let's see. Keyboard navigability. Oh, that's a mouthful. Yes, check. The main thing is, we could have improved a few things. One thing I noticed from other sites that I really like is we could have made it so that tabbing actually jumps between sections, like an application, and the arrow keys navigate buttons. But headings are a good shortcut that I think work adequately well. There are always different ways to improve this, and again, I'm not the subject matter expert here, but having the headings that are invisible there makes it so that at least you have this navigational structure. And also, if you just hear a summary of the page with your screen reader, it's going to announce all those different sections. You'll say, oh, build an avatar. I have to pick a piece, or pick a feature category, pick a piece, pick a color, then there's the preview. So it gives you a good sense of the page. Color contrast, that one is pretty subtle, but the main thing, if we come back to this, we enhance, you'll notice that if you focus on an element here, that little thing here, this is very good on contrast compliance. We used to have like this fancy opacity that would make it partially transparent. This was a little fainter. Don't do that, just stick with what's WCAG compliant, much better. So we just made it a solid white, which doesn't look as nice, but ensures that no matter what the background, it's contrast compliant. Because since these pieces can be anything, we want to make sure that it would always be compliant. Because imagine, for instance, like on a face, that'd be fine, because that's really light. But if, for instance, someone picked a darker skin tone or had a hair that was really dark, that text would just blend in. So you want to make sure that you're taking care of those. We also just made sure all of your buttons, all of your text are contrast compliant. It's worth mentioning. Are folks aware of contrast compliance? Raise of hands here. People know what that is? Great. Okay. So for anyone who isn't aware, contrast compliance is just, there's this little metric in WCAG that is, are 2 colors far enough apart to be readable? And one suggestion I have here is this lovely site, contrastratio.com, and you can punch in any 2 colors and it'll tell you if they're contrast compliant. For instance, white on black, highly contrast compliant. Not the best because it can be too jarring for some users, but for instance, if we do blue on, or black on blue, not only is that hideous, it's also inaccessible. So don't do that. So this is a great site. There's also a lot of tools, some of which I'll be referencing at the end, that can do this for you automatically on a whole website. But this is a good thing that you can use even in like a designer mock that you're creating to make sure your color pairs are acceptable.
thing. Chrome also has individual element level.
Oh, yes, thank you, Pete. So actually, he mentions a great thing, which Chrome has something in their developer tools that will show you if elements are contrast compliant. So in this example, for instance, if I click this button, and let me zoom in here so that everyone can see this a little more clearly. Thank you, Council. Okay, so if you click the color of the element, it's automatically pulling up a contrast ratio. And so it's showing two checks here, indicating that it's WCAG AAA compliant. And it's actually showing this is that blue button from the side there. You can't see it, it's off screen right now, but it is there. Okay, let me actually make sure we can see it. There we go, this button. So this has white text, and it has this lovely, oh no, that's a different thing now. 1 second. There we go. So it has this lovely blue background and this white text. It's going to show us a preview, and it confirms that's WCAG compliant. So you can do that individually in Chrome, which is really cool. And Lighthouse, I think, which is Chrome's inbuilt auditor, will also do that for you. So lastly, hidden navigation headings. We talked about that. Now, a word of caution here. Just because you can doesn't always mean you should, right? You can use hidden navigation headings everywhere. That's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Because navigation headings are really useful for sighted users too. They're really useful as just like a way of structuring a document. But if you have a visual application style thing, example I might give is like a calendar, like a Savage Card Builder, something like that, where like for a sighted user, the hierarchy is clear, there's too many interactive elements and jumping around is a pain for a screen reader, then I think a hidden navigation heading is useful. It's a good tool in your tool belt. And then the custom screen reader avatar preview. Now this is where the Angular CDK came in. Now the cool thing with this is any feature that you're building, if you're like, oh, we updated this thing, we need to announce this to a screen reader. ARIA Live is typically the mechanism that you can go about for doing that. But that can have mixed results when you're doing like a giant amount of text like we were. And when you want to make sure that you really have that fine control, like user presses button, here's text update. So the announcer is really powerful. So any questions on the avatar builder? Hopefully we've spent enough time on this that I've covered all the important stuff. Any questions on how we pulled any of this off? Great. So we've seen that. Now we get to the fun part. Takeaways for you. Step 1. This is really where the bread and butter starts. Design for accessibility. I mentioned before, no matter how smart your engineers are, no matter how much a programmer knows about accessibility, if the design is not accessible, the site cannot be accessible. So you need to plan and design for accessibility. And by doing that, we were able to cohesively implement accessibility considerations. We were also able to plan for more ambitious accessibility features, like the avatar preview. That was in our plan, in our technical documentation. We laid out, okay, we need to have this avatar preview system, and this is like a ticket we're going to plan to do, and this is how it will read. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't do. They're like, oh, well, like, just put in there, make it accessible. That's not enough, right? Think about how is a screen user going to use this? How is a user with a different disability going to use this? And really try and think of, are there solutions we have to come up with that work for this particular feature? If you're making a simple like static page, you probably don't need this, right? It's just make sure that your content's all marked up correctly, make sure your design is contrast compliant. But when you're doing a sophisticated piece of software like this that has a lot of UI elements, you have to really think about, is there an overarching accessibility thing that we need to do? And even better, follow inclusive design practice. I was citing Microsoft's inclusive design handbook there, and they're really good at that. And design with folks with disabilities. Really cool products come out of that design process. For instance, has anyone heard of the, it's the Xbox Inclusive Controller? I forget the exact name. If you know, shout it out. Has anyone heard of it? The like big white controller with the trackpads? No?
It's not the Steam controller, right?
No? So what happened, I'll actually pull it up here so that I don't sound crazy. Xbox Inclusive Controller. I forget the name of it. Xbox Adaptive Controller. There we go, that's the official name.
Oh, yeah, yes.
So the Xbox Adaptive Controller is a fascinating piece of technology, and it's also a really great example of what Microsoft can do when they take inclusive design to its like really full potential. So the Adaptive Controller is, they were like, how do we make it so everyone can play games? That was their premise. And they said disabilities are varied. So we cannot create one solution that works for everyone. Period. Full stop. They admitted that. And that's part of designing for the web, is you can't make one solution. You have to give your users power to customize their experience. So the Xbox Adaptive Controller mostly is these giant trackpads, which work as buttons and also as joysticks. for people who maybe don't have finger dexterity or maybe don't even have hands. And there's also, you'll notice the D-pad is significantly larger, so it's easier to press. But then the most important thing is actually the part that you don't see in the front here. See in the back, these are all ports. You can plug in any button, any peripheral into the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and whatever your use case, however you want to play, you can play with it. So if you notice, you can plug in joysticks, you can plug in a giant button, you can plug in whatever you want to do and hook it up to each of those controls so that it really works for you. And that's kind of the premise of inclusive design, is you want to make sure it works for everyone. And by testing with people with disabilities, Microsoft really realized that there wasn't one solution they could do. The best thing they could do was make it so that anyone could extend it and make that play for them the way they want to. And that's kind of the paradigm we want to follow. If you try and create this prescriptive solution for accessibility, it's not going to work. We recently had a user interview where we were talking to someone who had a significant visual impairment, and they had completely changed how our site looked using a tool that flipped all of their colors to be black with yellow text. And we hadn't thought about that. So there were certain things where we just hadn't nailed the look and feel quite right, where links weren't always obvious to him with this color scheme. So you have to remember, your users don't always see the site as you build it, because they have their own tools, they have their own softwares, from magnifiers to changing the font to changing the colors. And you have to be flexible, right? If your design is prescriptive, it's not going to work. Now, enough about design. Test for accessibility. This is step 2. You can have the best design, but if you do not test to make sure that your implementation is accessible, it's not going to be. Surprise, right? You have to make sure that you put in the legwork and test with it. So this is a combination of things. Test with users with disabilities, something that unfortunately we didn't do. I'm kind of disappointed ourselves for not going out and doing that with our avatar editor. So this is kind of my assumptions of what we think would be good. And I hope to get more feedback on it, but something that I highlight as something that we should have done and did not do. Testing yourself with accessibility tools like screen readers. This is something I mentioned. Again, just because something can work for you and you're like, oh, Aria Live does this thing. If you haven't used a screen reader, you don't really know what your user's experiencing. And there's also a wide variety of screen readers. Like, we know that there's NVDA and JAWS and Chromevox is one we use, and VoiceOver on Mac and iOS. Like, there's a variety of systems there, and you want to test with those and really get into the head of your users and be like, okay, what does it sound like for them? And make sure that it works for them. Now, the other thing is automated tools. Manually checking is really good, but it doesn't always work at scale. Automated tools, like HTML Code Sniffer, which is one I use pretty often, can help you check accessibility for a whole page. They can highlight color contrast issues across a whole page for you really quickly, highlight a wide variety of things. Again, they're not a replacement for manual human checkers who have much more nuance and can highlight things that maybe are technically accessible but aren't really accessible. Things like how buttons work and those kinds of things, automated tools don't do so well. And then, lastly, this is where Angular CDK comes in, leverage accessible libraries. The biggest mistake you can do is pull in vendor code that is inaccessible, because you will not be able to fix their bad work. It will not work for you. So rely on tools that are vetted by the community that you know are accessible. Google, for instance, is really good at this. Angular Material Design General, highly accessible. Angular CDK, which is from them, very, very accessible, and they're really good about following the standards. LiveAnswer, for example, reading out text. When we tried to build this ourselves, it was super buggy. We had this whole Aria Live solution where text would just push in and come out, and it would just cut off randomly. You'd be like, your avatar looks like brown hair, and it would just stop. So you can try and build your own solutions, but if someone has done it who has the expertise, like Google does and the backend, frankly, then use their libraries. Because if they do an accessible library, they're going to do it really well. Make sure you check it yourself, of course, but if the community vets it, it's like, hey, this is a really good tool, use it. And there's a lot of other great accessibility features. Pete was mentioning beforehand, modals. Google does modals really well. Modals are hard. Modals are really hard. Like, making an accessible modal is like you're managing focus. You have to make sure that it announces properly. You have to make sure that the background of the page is not accessible anymore. Like, it's a whole process, and it can be a real headache to do because we built it custom. But Google makes that really easy for you. So leverage accessible libraries. So now onto the closing parts here. These are some resources that you can use at home. The slide deck will be shared out, I think, by Pete. So there's a take-home demo. This has some styling that you can use to create a visibly hidden element or a focus-triggered element. It's just a really basic code pen. I'll pop it open now. So all it is, just do the full page view here. There we go. So all it is a document that looks like it has no headings, but there's some hidden headings. And then also, a button that only shows up when you focus it. So that is, again, using our visibly hidden class. We put that out there for you. It has a few enhancements to what like other posters have, just based on like using this for years. Like there were certain use cases we had, and we've just enhanced it with those. But yeah, it's overall, it's mostly you just hide the element using like borders and clip paths and all of those things, while making sure not to do anything that a screen reader would identify. Oh, this is a hidden element, like display none. You want to make sure to avoid those. But that is there for you. And then also a few other useful resources. The accessibility project, how to hide content. This is part of how we built our visually hidden headings. HTML code sniffer, I was mentioning this before. This is a really, really great tool because it just does a whole audit of a page and will give you back results really quickly. So if you're looking for a starting point, you're like, I have no idea how to make this page accessible. Start with a code sniffer. Once you whittle that down, you're going to be right on the path towards making a page really accessible. Again, for a complex application, it's not enough, and you should probably hire an auditing team who their expertise is how do we make sites accessible. But it's a great starting point. And then accessibility insights for web. This is a Microsoft tool. This one's really cool because it allows you to simulate certain disabilities. Like it allows you to turn a website into grayscale, allows you to pull out what are the headings on page, all those kinds of things. It's a really useful tool for accessibility. So that is about it. Any questions? And thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for coming out. But yeah, any questions, go for it.
Yeah, I have a question. So for the accessible library, is there a replacement for the ARIA like announce, or the live announcer versus the ARIA live?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so ARIA Live is still useful, and there are still certain cases that you might want to use it. But if you need to essentially just push out text via JavaScript, the Angular CDK version is going to be a lot easier for you and work a lot more reliably. ARIA Live is still good for stuff like notifications and things like that, where like a new element popped on screen, something like that should work very well. But where it gets tricky is trying to do an announcement where there's no visual element showing up. And that's where we found the live announcer was really useful. Great question. Anyone else?
What about your JSON? How much is the other work basically?
That I unfortunately can't show you.
Okay, for me, just
Yeah, I can give you a little prototype in a code pen here.
okay.
So we're gonna do some live coding. All right, so let's just make a code pen here. Do I have to? Let's just, there we go, perfect. So essentially what it came down to, let me expand this here. So we had some object that was like, avatar, big equals. So we had our JSON, or it's really a JavaScript object, but it was stored at JSON as a JSON string in the database. What we would do is we would have some care object, and this would be, we'd do piece ID, some unique identifier, and then color code, and this would be some color. And then we would do the same for everything else, so like ears, whatever the case may be, so on and so forth. And then what we would have is we would have a database of the pieces. So we would have, say, and we would do 1, 2, 3, 4 is our piece. And then we would say that was hair, so it has the name Swoopy, right? And then also, there's a colors object. Because remember, these colors are hex codes. We don't want to read that to a user. No one knows what FFF means outside the web world. So what we do is, I think, how we did is we just did an array of colors and then we looked them up. Array, name, white, color, FFF. And then to build it, we kind of just iterate through these. So you would do like avatar string equals, like, start with that. And then you just iterate through the config. So you do keys, avatar config, call that. I'm just very loosely writing here, so this is actually pseudocode. But we then do push to the avatar config, like for the piece and then whatever the name was. So we then look it up. So plus pieces, piece config, dot, what's that? Piece ID, dot name, right? So we're then pushing like, or you picked whatever the case may be. So like you picked rounds would be hair with color, and we would do color.find color. You can see why it gets pretty complicated after a little bit. Something like that. This code obviously does not run or output anything, but that was essentially the premise.
Okay.
So we had a config that was just tying like unique colors to unique pieces, and then we had dictionaries kind of that stored the colors with their names and the pieces with their names, and we just jumble all of it together into a human readable sentence using a bunch of iterators. So yeah, does that explain?
Oh yeah, I got a better idea now. So.
Yeah, great question. Any other questions?
What inspired you to get or focus so much on accessibility originally?
That is a great question. I wish I had this really inspiring, amazing answer, but the simple answer is the job listing for Packback. So the job listing said, front-end developer with accessibility specialization. I was like, I'm a front-end developer, and I don't know anything about accessibility, but I'm really good at learning things. And they're like, cool, I guess we'll do that. I still don't know why I got the job. I do know. I'm a very good front-end developer, and that made up for the other part. But I learned accessibility. I spent a lot of time doing a lot of reading and doing a lot of practice in that, and reading from much smarter people than I am about accessibility. And I can actually recommend, there's a book on my desk that's called A Web for Everyone. I would recommend if you're looking to get started. For everyone, there we go, from Rosenfeld Media. It's like a great kind of starter manual for accessibility. And it's also great because it's not just about websites. It's just about broadly disability and accessibility and what those approaches mean. And it has this really great system of what they call personas, which are kind of these characters that they make up of people with a different set of disabilities and how their interactions with the web might be frustrating or like what might impede them and what you can do to make sure that's better for them. So this book is really like a great like starter guide of like, okay, this is why accessibility matters. Because when I started, I was looking at auditor checklists and I was like, okay, the WCAG blah 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 is the blah 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 and this fails the blah blah blah. And I was like, why are we doing this? What does this mean? And this really tied it together and said, these people with this disability will need this accessibility enhancement. So it makes it so it's a more human interaction, which is, I think, a much more foundational basis for accessibility than checklists, right? A lot of teams work on accessibility for legal reasons. I think that's the wrong, you're not going to get the spirit of accessibility, right? WCAG is not the end goal. Accessibility is the end goal. WCAG is a means there. I realized I did not mention WCAG. Do people know what WCAG is? Raise hands if you know what WCAG is. Yes, yes, a little bit. Okay, so WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And it's essentially what most folks use as a set of standards for accessibility. So we work in the education technology space, and every single every single school is like, are you WCAG compliant? That's their thing. That's what they look at because that's what they're legally mandated to, and that's like the standard that we hold websites to legally. Often WCAG 2.0 AA is the technical specification, but it's essentially a set of checklists of like, do this and this and this and this and hundreds of them, and your site will be accessible. Again, I think it's much better to talk about the people and talk about the experiences and the impairments that people experience on the web of not being able to use a website. But WCAG is a great mechanism to get us towards an accessible direction. So, yes, I wish I had a more inspiring answer. The answer is a job list. Great question. Any other questions?
So how would you recommend if the project is already done? Can you make that accessible?
The classic question. I fucked up so far, how do I unfuck it up?
That's literally what happened here.
That's true. He paints a good picture. I was not the first person working on accessibility at Packback. Someone before me did that. But it was essentially the same situation. We were like, oh, fuck, that's a thing, and schools care about it a lot. We were like, okay, this is a thing we need to start doing. I really wish that wasn't the situation most companies were in. Let's start with that. But unfortunately, as someone who has a computer science background, nobody mentioned accessibility. Nobody did it. So I understand where you're coming from. And the solution is essentially audits, right? You have to start with what are the problems, create a big backlog, and just cycle through them. Because unless you're really going to be able to completely redesign your system, you have to start with what is inaccessible, what is the main issues, and work from there. Now, that can be really tricky because often those backlogs can be pretty huge. And people often ask questions like, well, how do we prioritize that accessibility? Give me the low-hanging fruit of accessibility. That's not really a thing, right? Like, that's not a thing. I will say that there are, like, WCAG has, like, different levels, and for instance, a WCAG level A failure is like a, you really fucked this up. It's like, this is really bad, don't do that. A WCAG level AA is like, this is really important, and you need to fix this. And then WCAG level AAA, that's their, like, highest, most stringent standard. That's like, this is the ultimate level of accessibility. And some of those can be really challenging to reach, depending on, like, what kind of system you're in. But the trick is, really, hire a professional auditor. That's going to be the most useful thing. But if you're just looking for like a quick start, using a tool like HTML Code Sniffer is a good way to at least get started. But then the other thing is just get your team trained. Use something like a screen reader and be like, oh my God, we can't navigate this using a screen reader. And you're going to have a good sense of like, okay, these are like target areas that we can fix. But it's the best approach I can recommend. Hire a professional, that's a really good way. Test with people who have disabilities, that's another way. Like, get the real feedback from your real users. Because again, WCAG is a useful tool, but real users are probably going to give you better insight of like what they wish you would fix right now versus what is the thing you need to fix so that they're going to keep using your product. So it's a very kind of approach. The main thing is get the information of what do you need to fix and fix it. Any other questions? Great question. I love that one. That's part of, as Pete mentioned, that was a big struggle for us at Packback.
You mentioned the user that had the yellow-black background. Has there been any other surprising feedback, good or bad, about the accessibility that you've gotten from real users?
That's a great question. So actually, there was one that we didn't anticipate. That it's just one of those things like you don't think about. Where we had a user, I'm going to show this user presenter mode here. Wow, look at that. That's convenient. I get that joke, but we built this feature 2 weeks ago to anonymize user data, and this is not what I was expecting to do with it, but it's very useful to us. Okay, so the issue that we had a little while ago is we had a blind student who came to us and said, I'm having a hard time getting my scores on Packback. Like, what do you mean? And so the thing is, this is what's called a curiosity score, and this is like the metric that Packback uses to kind of grade. And you'll notice that we have this tooltip here that says 83 curiosity points, learn more. Now, how this works is it uses an ARIA label, and then we use some fancy CSS to make it so that the ARIA label is shown as a tooltip, right? Now, the thing about ARIA labels is they replace the content inside of something, right? So if you take a button and you add an ARIA label, it's going to replace the button content. And the issue was we used to have it just say, curiosity points, learn more. And let's see what happens, and this is why screen readers are so useful. We enable our screen reader here, and we jump to this.
Community feed. Packback internal culture.
Oh my god.
Tab.
I'll let no.
Community feed.
Packback questions.
Okay.
Presenter mode is on. Usernames and avatars are hidden.
That is
Close
true.
this alert. Alert. Retrieving community list.
Okay.
Tab list.
There we go.
83 curiosity points. Learn more.
So what happens is, if I remove this again, hopefully it'll let me without too much headache.
Community feed. Packback internal culture. Google Chrome. Window. Generic container.
Here for a second. So we delete this, and then we go back to this.
View this curiosity points. Learn more.
So if you are a blind user, and this is all your tooltip says, all they heard was curiosity points, learn more. And they're like, cool, but what are my points? And the system's like, curiosity points, learn more. And you're like, right, but what are my points? So you have to think about, like, when you're doing these kind of like interesting solutions and you're using ARIA, that you're overriding something else to make sure to test on screen reader. So that's one piece of like really interesting feedback that we had that we just didn't think about that, and we like somehow missed that in testing of like, oh, this overrides this content. So it's now inaccessible what the original thing was because we want to add a fancy tooltip. Was there anything else? I don't recall anything else. The colors were a really interesting one, and I can actually show. We'll see if it works with Chromecast. Let's see.
I mean, on the converse of that, one of the earliest feedbacks we got was from a professor who actually had a student with, a site issue of some kind, who actually raved about how well they could navigate our site. So we actually did get a very positive response at one point, which help bolster our feelings about it, because it is a very difficult process to take a system that was not built with accessibility in mind and completely refactor it to accommodate it.
Yeah, that's true. And that's actually one thing that I will highlight is like, I'm always very open when we talk about accessibility at Packback. We are not BitCAG compliant. That's it. Like, we're not, like, if you look at the strict checklist, every time they come back with failures and we're not compliant. Oh, okay, so it's not going to do it up there. So we're going to do this the old-fashioned way, which is I'm going to show you the screen. So this was actually a thing of the user was sharing their screen with us, but this tool integrates at a certain level where you don't actually, like, if you're sharing with someone, it doesn't show up. So, there we go. Okay, thank you. I know Zoom text is launched. So we're actually going to showcase what this color looks like.
Zoom text enable.
I forgot to turn that off. There we go.
Color enhancements enable. Color.
So this, I don't know why I said it. Okay, we'll just click here. So this is an example of what it looks like with Zoom text. I'll just walk around here slowly. But look, if it's not working, it's not working. But essentially, you can change your colors to be anything you want. And we had not anticipated this at all.
Color.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Zoom text. We're going to stop now. But, so that's one of those things that you have to...
Smart invert for Google Chrome.
It's a real pain to get rid of it.
Windows Community Key.
Text Chrome extension.
What responsibility do everyday
What's happening is I think two screen readers are fighting over who gets to say things. It's really not a pleasant time. Okay, we're just gonna, can you go away, please? Okay, apparently it's not going to shut down for me. So we're gonna just keep,
Zoom text magnifier reader. Color.
please. There we go. Okay. Ah, there we go.
Are you sure you want to get out of the Zoom text?
All right. So, point is, try the tools that your users are talking about, because often what can happen is these like accessibility tools integrate at such a deep level of the software that if you're sharing with some screen recording system, it won't show up for you, because a lot of them are baked into the operating system. Zoom text isn't, but like Windows has a built-in magnifier, and if you were sharing with someone's screen, you probably wouldn't see that. If they have high contrast mode on, you'll probably see that, but maybe not. So an important thing too is like test the stuff yourself. And again, one of the reasons I really cite like hire professionals is professionals know this stuff in and out, right? Like when we hired an auditing firm, they didn't test with one screen reader. They tested with like 4. They tested with all the major ones because they know what people use and they know how to test with those. And again, also, talk to people who have actual disabilities and get their insights on that. And what was the original question? We got in a whole mess over there for a second. All right, any other questions? Close out the night? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so what are we planning to do, or what are we hoping to do to continue inclusion as we grow?
That was a great question. So Drew here works at Packback for anyone who doesn't know, so that's why it sounded like a very targeted question from an audience. What are you doing? The main thing is our engineers are all trained in accessibility. We have checklists of things that we want to make more accessible, but it's really like at the design stage. Like every new feature, we test it for accessibility, we test it with screen reader, we test it with automated tools. But the other thing that we want to do that we want to incorporate more of is bringing people in for user interviews who have disabilities. Like I mentioned, this tool we only found out about because a student emailed his professor was like, I cannot navigate on Packback with my tool. And the reason was because when he hovered over links, it just wasn't, like the color shift in yellow just was not clear. Because it like, our links are in blue and the color shift is fairly clear, but when it's transitioned to a different color set, it didn't make sense. So we're like, okay, let's make it so that we do what HTML does and has links underlined, which is a much more obvious solution. So the short version is essentially, we want to make sure that we bring in people with disabilities to test our site and make sure that our site is good. We want to make sure that our engineers are consistently trained so that they know what accessibility is and they can work with it. We also want to make sure that all new features out there are fully accessible. And then lastly, that remediation thing that you talked about. We've messed up all this old stuff, let's fix all of it. So it's making sure that we're whittling down this checklist of accessible items so that we're really getting towards that full WCAG compliance. Great question. All right, fantastic questions. These were really good. We've gotten to a lot of different topics. Any last questions? Anything is fair game. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. I hope this was enlightening. As I mentioned, This will be posted online with full subtitles. I will make sure to do that. And the slides will be sent out by Pete, so you'll have all these lovely resources available to you. And I'll be here afterwards to chat. I think we'll have some time to socialize, maybe. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Quality presentation as always, Victor.
Thank you.
I will mildly contradict a couple of things you said. One being, there is some low-hanging fruit in accessibility. Generally, color contrast is one of the easier ones to tackle because it fits into an engineering narrative. It is, you take two things, you get a number, oh, that number is not where you want it to be, let's start finding what we can do to get to that number. A little easier to track, you can kind of get to. But yeah, there's one other thing, but I can't. And also, Victor downplayed quite heavily. If he didn't know accessibility coming into his interview, his coding challenge blew it out of the water. He just really hammered everything we needed him to hit on that. So yeah, he did all right. Well, thank you all for coming. Much fewer than said they would come, but still, that's how it goes. Please enjoy some more sandwiches, enjoy some LaCroix if that is your want, or, not a millennial at heart, you can have some Coke. And not pointed in any direction. But we thank you all for coming, and once again, a general call for anyone who wants to present. If you have any topic you want to talk about, as you saw, this was Angular, but it was still accessibility. It wasn't, the Angular aspect was just how the app happened, but the accessibility was really the crux of what we're talking about. So if you have any topic you want to talk about in the realm of software development, we're here to listen to it and want to learn about it. So please, come up to me afterwards, message me later if you think about it in another week, 2 weeks, what have you, if it still works. But once again, thank you all for coming out. Enjoy some more sandwiches and drinks and socialize. Thank you.
Thanks, David.